Commander Vrethkai said it on my first day, while I was still unloading my med kit from the transit crate. He said it in Vrethkai, which he probably assumed I didn't speak, and what he said, loosely translated, was that the Terran field medic moved like something that had evolved to be eaten. He wasn't being cruel. He was being clinical. That was almost worse. I set down my kit, found my bunk, decided not to tell him yet. The Joint Research Station on Cathara 9 was a 6-month survey contract, 12 Vrethkai garrison soldiers plus 4 humans on a wilderness moon that the Interstellar Survey Compact had flagged as high interest and extremely high risk. The Vrethkai were there for force protection. We were there for biology, medicine, and field documentation. The moon itself didn't much care about either assignment. Cathara 9 was 160 million square kilometers of canopy jungle, thermal upwellings, and megafauna that had been evolving undisturbed for approximately 60 million years. The apex predator was called the Dravith. The compact xenobiology file ran to 400 pages, and the executive summary was, "Do not be outside when it hunts." The Vrethkai had read the file. They'd also spent the transit reviewing footage, running threat simulations, calibrating their armor plating's impact dampening coefficients for a predator massing somewhere between 8 and 12 tons. They arrived at Cathara 9 extremely well prepared. They were also, I noticed, very loud about it. The Terrans, Vrethkai said to his second, Kethnar, on day 2 again in Vrethkai, while I was patching a sensor, let's say 4 meters away, have no secondary dermal layer, no plating, no threat response musculature. I have seen their baseline impact tolerance. A Dravith's foreclaws would open one like a field ration. Kethnar made the noise that passes for laughter in Vrethkai. A low click series in the back of the throat. They move wrong, he said. Fall, slow head swivel, small visual profile. Prey patterns. Prey patterns, Vrethkai agreed. I finished the relay splice and moved on. I want to be fair to them. By any reasonable measure, they were right. I am 162 centimeters tall. I weigh 58 kilograms. I carry a field medic kit, a short-range comm unit, and a folding blade that the Vrethkai, when they saw it, described as decorative. I have no armor plating, no enhanced musculature, no secondary dermal layer. Ath stood a full head taller than me and outmassed me by perhaps 140 kilograms of bone-dense Vrethkai frame. His unit's lightest soldier weighed more than I did by 60 kilos. They were warriors. They were enormous. They were armored and fast, and had been bred for violence across 1,000 generations of their species' history. The thing they had not been bred for, the thing their entire evolutionary inheritance had not prepared them for, was this moon. But I didn't say that either. I kept notes and let it run. The first 3 weeks on Cathara 9 were the kind of field work I'd signed up for. The jungle was extraordinary. Canopy layers running 60 meters high, bioluminescent root systems, thermal columns that the flying megafauna rode like thermals in a desert. We documented 17 species the compact files had only partially cataloged, including one that turned out to be the juvenile form of what the files had cataloged as 2 separate adults. I was busy. I liked being busy. The Vrethkai ran their perimeter patrols, kept their weapons calibrated, and continued their quiet, fluent commentary on the soft and baffling Terrans. Was the primary subject. The other 3 humans, Solus, Marek, and Dr. Hambi, were larger and moved with more visible purpose. I was the one who walked quietly, took small steps, and had a habit of stopping to look at things. "It is doing the stillness thing again," Kethnar said once, watching me observe a nest structure from 30 meters out. "It does that," said Vrethkai. "It has no visible startle response. I've tested it twice." He had. I'd heard both attempts and simply hadn't reacted. There didn't seem to be any upside to explaining why. On day 19, Dr. Ohambi took me aside after dinner and asked very quietly whether I planned to keep not reacting indefinitely. "Until it's useful," I said. She nodded. She'd been in the field long enough to recognize the logic. The Dravith alarm went off at 0340 on day 22. Not a drill. Perimeter sensors lit on 3 separate nodes. Northwest, north, and northwest again, which meant a pride moving in formation rather than a single scout. And the outpost response lighting went red, and the klaxon ran for exactly 4 seconds before Vrethkai silenced it. Standard protocol was his immediate defensive position, all personnel to hardened interior, No external movement until the Pride cleared the sensor range. I was awake before the alarm finished. Old habit. I sat up on my bunk, pulled on my boots, and looked through the interior window at the perimeter monitoring station. The 12 Vrethkai were already on the floor. They were fast, I'll give them that. In full combat posture, weapons drawn, facing the northwest wall, and then they stopped. Not a tactical stop, not a held position. A stop. Vrethkai was the first. It ran through him from the feet up like a circuit tripping. The weapon arm went rigid. The weight shifted back onto the heels. The head dropped a half degree, the jaw locked. Then Kethnar beside him. Then the third and the fourth. And, inside of 4 seconds, all 12 of them were standing with their weapons pointed at the northwest wall, and none of them were moving. I had read about this. The Vrethkai homeworld. Vrethkai, which is one of those planet names that means our world in the local language, was as a grassland planet with a relatively modest megafauna index. Their prey-predator ecology had resolved itself about 200,000 years ago, which in evolutionary terms is recent. The Vrethkai had been the apex predator on their own world for so long that the response had calcified rather than been refined. When their neurology registered something bigger and faster and meaner than they were, which on their own world was nothing, and in the wider galaxy was occasionally everything, it tripped a hardwired motor inhibition response. Fight or flight, locked before it could resolve. Because the species had never needed to develop the resolution pathway, they would unfreeze. It would take somewhere between 90 seconds and 4 minutes, depending on individual variants and the proximity of the threat signal. Outside, through the perimeter sensors, I could see 3 heat signatures. The lead animal was approximately 10 meters long and moving at a walk, which in Dravith means unhurried and curious. The other 2 were flanking, slightly behind. A small pride, probably territorial scouting rather than active hunting, given the hour and the formation. I picked up my field kit, checked the contents out of habit, and walked to the perimeter gate. "Osi," that was Solus, from his bunk, voice very flat. "What are you doing?" "Terrence protocol," I said. "Go back to sleep." He did not go back to sleep, but he also didn't follow me, which was the right call, and I appreciated it. The gate was manual release. I pulled the handle, stepped through, and let it close behind me. The jungle, at 0340 on Kethera 9, was not dark. The bioluminescent systems gave off enough light to read by, if you weren't particular about it. Thermal columns made the air smell like warm stone, and something sweet I'd never identified. The canopy moved in the updraft. The lead, Dravith, was 30 meters out and had already seen me. I knew it had seen me because it had stopped walking in its forwardmost pair of eyes. It had 3 pairs, arranged in a dorsal ridge from nose to skull, were tracking me with the calm, total attention of something that has never once had to hurry. I stop too. This is the first thing. You stop, and you make your silhouette as neutral as possible, and you do not look at the eyes directly. I looked at the throat. The throat tells you more anyway. The threat display in a Dravith, if one is coming, begins at the throat and moves forward along the jaw. Musculature. What I was looking at was a relaxed throat. The jaw was closed. The forward limbs were weight-bearing normally, which meant no pre-strike loading. The animal was watching me the way you watch something unexpected, not the way you watch something you intend to. Eat. I exhaled slowly. The exhale is audible, and audible means present, and present means known. Unknown things are more threatening than known things. This is true of most predators that hunt by ambush. The lead animal's second pair of eyes shifted, a tracking adjustment picking up the sound it held. I took 1 step sideways. Slow, lateral, retreating, not approaching, repositioning. The message is, I know where you are, and I have chosen not to move toward you. The lead animal took 1 step sideways in response. Same direction mirroring, not threat assessment. I moved sideways again. It moved again. We did this twice more. And then I stopped and it stopped. And we held there for about 40 seconds. And then the lead animal's throat worked in a low subsonic rumble that I felt more than heard, and it turned its head back toward the jungle. The flanking 2 followed before the lead had completed the turn. 20 seconds later, the heat signatures were moving northwest, away from the perimeter. I came back through the gate, sealed it, walked back into the interior station, and sat down on a crate to check whether my hands were shaking. They weren't, which was good, but I preferred to verify. Behind me, slowly, Vrethkai were coming unfrozen. It wasn't graceful. The motor inhibition releases in waves, and the first thing to come back is usually the balance reflex, which means there's a moment where a very large armored warrior with a loaded weapon is struggling not to fall over. I watched it happen to Vrethkai and was glad I was already sitting down, because my expression at that moment was one I had been professionally suppressing for 3 weeks, and I didn't fully trust it. He caught himself, set his feet, looked at the sensor board, which showed 3 heat signatures receding into the jungle at a walk. Then he looked at the gate. Then he looked at me. He crossed the floor in 6 steps, and he stopped in front of me. And he was quiet for a moment in the way that very large beings are sometimes quiet when they are recalibrating something significant. "Did you do?" he said, in standard this time. "Deterrence protocol," I said. "Large predator, non-active hunt posture, borderline territorial. Lateral displacement, audible presence establishment, mirroring to signal awareness without aggression." It read as known quantity rather than prey and moved on. He looked at me for a long time. "Where did you learn this?" "Growing up," I said. "We have large predators on Earth. We've had them for a long time. You learn to read them, or you don't last long enough to pass the information on." Another silence. Vrethkai had very dark eyes, most Vrethkai do, and they were doing something I'd seen in senior officers before, which is a rapid internal accounting of all prior assessments. "How long," he said carefully, "have humans coexisted with apex predators?" "Depends on which line you draw," I said. "Somewhere between 30 and 60,000 years of documented behavioral adaptation." The instinct set is older. He was quiet for what felt like a full minute. "I called your movement patterns prey patterns," he said. "I know," I said. "I was 4 meters away. I won't claim the following weeks were warm. The Vrethkai don't do warm, especially not in the direction of someone who watched them lock up and didn't pretend not to." Vrethkai stopped explaining my biological deficiencies to Kethnar, and Kethnar stopped clicking. On day 31, Vrethkai asked me, formally, if I would be willing to run a predator response orientation session for his unit. I said yes. I kept my face completely neutral when I said it. He had the good sense not to ask why that seemed to cost me something.